Well, but it should underscore for us as people who value our own freedom that we need to always have a plan B and a plan C so that the socialists can't do to us what they've done to the people who are in Venezuela.
From Anarchapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I've got a great first-time guest coming on. His name's Kyle Varner. He's a doctor, and he calls himself a hospitalist, and he's actually a free market healthcare advocate. He's very libertarian. He's an anarchist, and he actually goes around the world helping people. He actually was just in Venezuela. He was working with Movimiento Voluntario, which is the freedom movement in Venezuela, and obviously helping people down there with whatever issues they have health-wise. And he also is big involved in medical tourism. And so he essentially helps people escape the U.S. Horrible medical system, and especially the government involvement and the insurance companies and all that kind of stuff. And he comes down to Mexico quite often. He's actually going to be in Mexico City in a couple days doing some work. And we're talking to him about speaking at Anarchapulco as well, at least in the health and wellness portion. We'll see what other portion of the event we can have him at. Very interesting. Everything I've heard about him is very interesting, but I haven't really met him before, so this is the first time. So I'm like you, I'm going to find out a lot about what he does here today. So Kyle, a pleasure to have you on. And the first question I have to ask you is, how did you become an anarchist?
Well, I've kind of had a lifelong obsession with libertarian ideas. So it started when I was 15 years old, and I had this crazy idea all by myself that drugs should be legalized. I started searching on, at that time, I guess it was Yahoo, and I found the writings of this guy named Harry Browne. And so I started reading Harry Browne stuff, and this was prior to his 2000 presidential campaign. I got involved in that, started reading Ayn Rand, started reading Murray Rothbard, and getting into this set of ideas. And as you immerse yourself in the ideas, you realize that every government is a mafia. And when you realize that every government is a mafia, you start to realize that the only form of a civilized society is a stateless society. And so I've vacillated throughout my life, sometimes calling myself a classical liberal, sometimes a minarchist. But as I've gotten older and understood more, I tend to consider myself as an anarcho-capitalist, as somebody who believes that society can evolve into a stateless society with an advanced form of capitalism and actually, for once, be civilized. And that's what I hope for eventually, hopefully to see that in my lifetime.
That's great. Definitely Harry Browne, Ayn Rand, and Murray Rothbard are great introductions to the philosophies of libertarianism and anarchy. And one of the things that I'm a huge proponent of, I talk about it all the time, is we can't just talk about this stuff. We have to go out there and do it. So that's why I really like what I've heard you're doing. You're basically trying to help people get around the horrible government medical system in the U.S. So give us your background there. Like, you're a doctor, I presume. Why did you start? Why are you doing this? And what are you doing?
Sure. Well, when I first went to college, I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And then during my junior year of college, I kind of had a little bit of a life crisis and said, I can't do that. I have to do something else. And so I decided to go to medical school. But I didn't have the grades to get into a U.S. medical school. So I went to Antigua, a Caribbean island. And so I spent 2 years there and then 2 years in Puerto Rico. And then I started practicing and did my residency in the United States. And I learned what a rotten healthcare system we have. It's a rotten system because they take all of your money in the form of insurance premiums and taxes, and they take a lot of it. And so then they render you helpless. And not to mention, the prices in the United States are absurd. And so even moderately wealthy people have anxiety about not being able to take care of themselves. And so it's this dependency trap where they take your money and then they act like you're supposed to be grateful that they're taking care of you. But they're taking care of you on their terms, not yours. So what they're really doing is robbing you of your freedom, and it drives me insane. And so that's
just briefly on doing things for you and expecting you to be grateful for it. That's actually a great Harry Browne quote about how the government breaks your leg and then hands you a crutch and says, "Aren't you glad that I'm here?"
Right. And so my goal is to teach people how to stop the government from breaking their leg. And then they can truly be independent, because we can only put so much stock in political solutions, right? Like, I'm going to fight for free market healthcare reform in the United States politically, but the tide is against me, right? The overwhelming probability is that eventually you're going to have some giant government takeover and you're going to have less freedom in the United States. But that doesn't mean you personally have to have less freedom. You can have more freedom if you structure your life appropriately and take the steps necessary to take the freedom back. People aren't going to give you your freedom. You have to take it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I was saying I really like what you're doing, because you realize the problem, you realize it's probably not going to get fixed politically. So you're going out there and actually just doing something to help people. And I think that's so important. So give us some examples of like what you do exactly.
Okay, so when I was in medical school, I was really obese. I had an obesity problem for my entire life. Weighed about 300 pounds. Life was miserable. For me, it was a big issue. I didn't consider it acceptable. And I had been through every diet you could imagine, every program. Nothing worked. And so I came to the conclusion that I needed bariatric surgery. Now, as a medical student, I didn't have much money. And I also actually didn't meet the guidelines to have bariatric surgery in the United States. But what I found is that there's a robust market of bariatric surgeons in Mexico who will do that. So I was able to get $5,000 together and go to Tijuana, have the surgery, and it completely revolutionized my life. So what you have there is an example of saying, if most people in the United States look and they say, oh, I can't afford it and they won't let me have it, I guess I'm just not going to get it. Whereas what I did is I said, it's way too expensive here. No, I don't have the money for it here. But let me see if there's some place where there's more freedom and where there's more of a market and where I might be able to solve my problem. And so I took the responsibility to pay for it myself. I took the responsibility to learn about things myself and to research and vet my doctors myself. But in the end, I had a life-changing experience. And so I'm working on teaching that all over the country. I go to every conference that I can, teaching people about different strategies, including medical tourism, including healthy lifestyles, including health sharing organizations, including even expatriating in some cases, to take control of their healthcare back from this horrible complex that we have as the government and bureaucracy and insurance companies, and be able to control their own healthcare.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. I'm from Canada originally, and Canada, for as long as I've been around, has had a government medical system, socialized healthcare, they call it. I never call it healthcare when the government's involved. And it's horrible. And so many people who need things always, I heard this my whole life, I need something, it's a 6-month or 12-month waiting list, I'm going to go down to the U.S. It used to be a lot cheaper in the U.S., of course, until the government got involved. Maybe you can comment on that. But a lot of people are like, well, I just go down, I pay $1,000, I can get it done right away. It's like so much better. And now, of course, the U.S. has kind of gone towards this Obamacare or whatever they're doing. I don't even fully understand it. It's so complicated, all the things, the way they do it. And so now you hear about Americans, they're like, I can't get the things I need. It's too expensive. And now they're all coming to Mexico, and I think Canadians are as well. So it's kind of funny that, they put in the news, like, Mexico's dangerous, don't go down there, all that kind of stuff. Whereas up in Canada and the U.S., you can't even really get a lot of the things that you need for the most part.
Right, you can't. And what's more dangerous, not being able to afford your insulin or walking into a pharmacy and paying less than $100 for a month or a 2-month supply? I mean, there's just no comparison. And the rhetoric that we hear in the United States is extremely disingenuous. I mean, I've been all over the world, and I've been to some places that really scare me to go, but Mexico is not one of them. Mexico is just not a scary place.
Yeah, I was telling you before, I just came back from getting stem cells. I did it in my hair, I actually put it in my dick, and I did an IV in Puerto Vallarta at the Dream Body Clinic there. And it's amazing, like this whole area of Puerto Vallarta, I don't know if you've been there or not, but the Nuevo Vallarta, it's all kinds, any kind of health-related thing you can imagine. There's plastic surgeons, everything. It's like a major industry in Mexico now, and it's beautiful, and the quality is excellent. Like, in fact, it's kind of funny, I tell people, I hear this less and less. I think people are starting to wake up. But I used to hear, man, you're in Mexico. Don't you ever worry you're going to get sick? I'm like, I hope I get sick in Mexico. If I get sick in the U.S. and I need real, some sort of emergency care, it'll bankrupt me in the U.S. It's like, I hope I end up sick in Mexico. And I've actually only been in a hospital really once. And I had a really bad stomach infection I just couldn't get rid of. And a typical guy, I waited until I couldn't even move anymore. And my wife's like, go to the hospital. And I'm like, oh, I can get through through this. And finally, I couldn't even get out of bed. And she called the doctor. He came to our apartment, which is awesome in Mexico. That happens so often. And he's like, oh, yeah, we got to get you to the hospital. So we go to the hospital, and we drive up, and there's like a red carpet going into the hospital. And there was like valets and all kinds of nice people. And they whisked me right into this nice room. It's got like a flat screen TV. And then 5-6 doctors looked at me. They're all doing tests. And within 2 days, I was fine. They gave me all the IVs and everything. And the total cost was about $1,500 for about 6 specialists looking at me, VIP service in Canada. And you can maybe comment on the US. In Canada, forget about it. You have to go to the emergency room at the hospital and wait while all the car accident people come through and they're all bleeding. And you're like, I don't feel good. They're like, you got to wait. I've sat in the emergency room in Canada for like 12 hours before just because I had something that was pretty severe enough that I needed it to some way to stop the pain at the very least, but I wasn't going to die right away. And you just sit there forever. It was just horrible. So give us some of your take on that.
Yeah, well, it's a horrible experience, and here's why. It's because in the United States, for all practical purposes, the hospitals all have local monopolies. They're a cartel. And so, you can't say, well, the hospital service in my town is really bad. I'm going to open a new hospital. For multiple reasons. In most states, there are laws that prevent you from opening a hospital without the permission of your competitors. They're called certificate of need laws. But there are also so many licensure and regulation requirements that the barrier to entry for a hospital is really, really high. And then also, they're operating under a system of price controls. It's a very weird system of price controls, but what it means is that there's no elasticity. So if there's a supply-demand mismatch, prices don't rise temporarily to draw new entrants into the market. So what it actually means is that we're suffering under a chronic shortage of hospital beds. There's also a chronic shortage of doctors because the number of doctors in the United States is centrally planned, set by Congress, essentially. And so what this all means is, you have to wait. This is not something where they're eager to please you as a customer. They couldn't care less if you're happy. And one of my biggest dissatisfactions about practicing medicine in hospitals in the United States is that the patients are dissatisfied because they've waited for 6 hours in the emergency room, because they don't have a choice of who their doctor is. They don't have a choice of what hospital they'll go to. The ambulance will take you to the nearest hospital and you'll get admitted there unless there's a medical need to send you elsewhere. I've taken care of critically ill patients who I've had to keep in the ER because there were no ICU beds in the entire city. And so I have somebody on a ventilator on the doorstep of death, and I'm trying to take care of them in the ER instead of the ICU because of shortages. So this system is really, really bad. And then the worst part is when you get your bill and you find out that this insurance plan that you've been paying $1,000 a month for didn't even cover half of it, and you owe $50,000 or $75,000 because different doctors were in network, out of network. It's absolutely crazy. So I try to spend as much time as I can outside the United States. So in case I have an emergency, I'm not going to be financially destroyed. I'm not going to be treated like a beggar or a welfare recipient instead of a customer. If I go to the hospital in Mexico, I'm a customer. Every time I've been to getting healthcare in Mexico, when I want the appointment, they give it to me at that time. They ask, what do I need? They are taking extra care to make sure I'm happy and all my concerns are addressed. It's a level of service you cannot begin to expect in the United States.
Yeah, I'm not from the U.S., and so you probably know more than me, but I kind of have the impression like 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago in the U.S., it was really good. It was almost like in Mexico. And then it's kind of just gone downhill to the point where it got to this, and I don't even really fully understand it, as I told you, because, in Canada, if I had to say which one's better, just from a person's perspective, I'd say Canada is better than the U.S. right now because everyone pays taxes and tons of taxes. Like everyone's poor because of it. But you do get free medical care. You'll have to wait forever and all that kind of stuff, but you never actually have to pay for anything. I think if you're going to do a socialized system, that is better than the U.S., which seems to be this like monstrous mix between fascism and socialism.
Right.
That's like the worst of both worlds.
You're absolutely right. It is the worst of both worlds. The greatest thing I think about Canada is that if you go overseas to get your care, at least some of it will still be paid for. And so if you're paying for health care, the worst thing that can happen to you is they take all your money and then they strand you and they don't give you anything. So if you're stranded in Canada, at least you can go elsewhere. And so that's a really big plus on their side. But yeah, what we have in the United States is as every single sector of the healthcare economy has basically gotten together and engaged in regulatory capture. So they've argued that for the sake of the patients, we have to have all of these very stringent safety measures, and they've restricted entry into their market, and then they've raised their prices. My profession, doctors have done it. The pharmaceutical companies always make disingenuous arguments that, oh, we can't allow you to import medications from abroad because they might not be safe. Meanwhile, they're charging absurd prices. And it's disingenuous if you have a brain. The hospitals do it, the insurance companies do it, the radiology companies do it. Everybody's got regulatory capture, their own cartel, and they're overcharging. And so, and then you've of course got this giant monstrosity of a bureaucracy called Medicare. Even the private insurance companies get more than 50% of their money from the government. So I don't like to call it private healthcare because it's absolutely not. There's not a single, with the exception of what we call the direct primary care movement, which is doctors who have completely opted out of the system and only take cash. With the exception of that, there's not a single private entity in American medicine today. I just hate it when people try to say that we're some kind of a privatized system. We're not. We're a fascist system, as you said. I think that's the definition of fascism, when you have large government, large companies that take their direction from the state, and it's basically central planning one step removed.
Yeah, it's funny to hear from some people. A lot of people in the U.S. who are very what you call liberals or left wing, they'll go, "Oh, this private healthcare system sucks. We need the government to take care of it." And as you just pointed out, I'm like, what part of this is private? This looks like the Soviet Union. You've got like the Politburo deciding how many doctors. There's cartels and monopolies in hospitals, which I wasn't even aware of. So that's new information for me. And of course, what's another thing that people say about government? Well, if we didn't have government, there'd be monopolies. That's what the government does. The government itself is a monopoly.
Yeah, it's very hard for a monopoly to exist in a free market because all of the individual market actors pursue their own interests. So cartels don't stick together unless you have a government regulatory structure keeping the cartel together. So we're suffering in the United States because of this system, and we're suffering because of the government, not in spite of the government. We don't need the government to do more. We need them to do a hell of a lot less. But in the meantime, we just need to take matters into our own hands. That's the only thing we can do as individuals to have a higher quality life.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what I always say as well, and that's what how I live. What's your take on where things are going to go in the U.S.? It seems to be going downhill more and more and more. Like, where's this going?
Yeah, I'm really pessimistic politically in the United States because I see that authoritarian populism is on the rise all over the world, and it has like right and left wing movements. So right, you've got Donald Trump, and I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump would be willing to sign a Medicare for All bill as long as the Democrats didn't like it for some reason.
He actually said before, he's actually said the opposite of everything he's said in the past. So it was about 10 years ago he was interviewed, and he was a huge supporter of government health care at the time.
But what happens is you've got such a strong negative reaction to Donald Trump that the radicals on the left, the tankies, the Trotskyites on the left are gaining power. So who's going to be the next president of the United States after Donald Trump? Well, it might be Bernie Sanders, who has been known to praise the Soviet Union, who went to Nicaragua and praised the Sandinistas. You've got somebody who loves the form of government they have in Cuba. It's very scary. But what we also see is that the liberal voices, the free market advocates, the people who want to talk about government doing less and individuals having more freedom are getting drowned out. Right now, what we have to sell isn't selling very well. And so I'm really pessimistic for the political prospects. That doesn't mean I'm not going to fight. I'm going to definitely continue advocating for free market policies until my last breath, but I'm not going to put all my chips in that because it's not likely to pan out.
Yeah, definitely in the U.S. it doesn't look like it. In fact, it looks like if Trump builds this wall, it'll be to keep people in from getting out to get actual health services that they need and can afford at some point.
It absolutely could be. And when you talk about economic nationalism, spend your money at home. Well, spend your money at home and get ripped off. That's what happens under economic nationalism, and I could definitely see that taking a really sinister turn with our healthcare. And with our right to travel, I mean, the UK used to do this where you had currency controls, so if you traveled abroad as a British person, you could only bring a certain amount of money per day that you were out. So there are some really dangerous policies that could eventually be implemented if authoritarian populism continues to rise all around the world and in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. It's already started. Quite often when I leave the U.S., not all the time, but quite often getting on an international flight somewhere, there'll be these guys in, their bulletproof vests down on your way into the airplane, and they'll be asking how much money you have and like checking you and stuff like that for, making sure you don't take too much money out. It's getting pretty wild and crazy. So one of the cool things that you told me is you were down in Venezuela working. I don't know when it was, but I'd like to hear some of those stories. It must be interesting, both from the libertarian aspect and also what kind of crisis is happening there.
So I went down to the Venezuelan border with Colombia in the town of Cucuta, Colombia, and I volunteered at a clinic that's run by a non-governmental organization, 100% non-governmental, that's there to support the refugees. And what's happening in Cucuta is, so that you understand, is in Venezuela, to get a passport requires about $1,000 bribe. So most people don't have passports. If you have a passport, you're not likely to be in Venezuela. These people come across the border to Colombia with just their cedula or their Venezuelan ID, and they're not permitted legally to work, and they're not permitted to leave the state of Norte de Santander, which is the state that Cucuta is in. So you got a little over 1 million refugees in this city that on a good day has 1.5 million people, so it's swelled to 2.5 million people, and they have no legal right to work. Anything that they took from home is basically worthless. They have not a penny in their pocket, and they've been suffering from the decay of the healthcare system for years and years and years in Venezuela. So I saw so many cases of advanced cancer that have been just neglected. I saw, for example, a young 25-year-old who had surgery 5 years ago after a car accident with some metal plates in his leg that had been infected for 5 years, and he had just been on antibiotics, and then he had run out of those antibiotics. He was very sick. I saw a young lady with tracheal stenosis who ended up dying a couple weeks after I left because she wasn't able to get the rather simple surgery. I saw a 77-year-old blind man who took a bus for 24 hours from Caracas to get to our clinic, and he and his wife slept on the street. They didn't have any money for anything, for a bus ticket back home or anything. He needed a doctor, and that was the only way they could get one. So I saw with my own eyes for the first time how socialism takes everything from people. First it takes their money, then it takes their health, and then it takes their dignity. And it's socialism is like, in my opinion, it's the most extreme form of statism. There are other forms of statism, but socialism is the most extreme, and so it's the one I react most strongly against. And when I saw these people suffering in this way, I mean, it broke my heart, but it also redoubled my conviction that socialism is the most evil ideology in the world and has to be opposed by any means necessary, because this kind of thing can happen to us. I mean, Nicolas Maduro referred to Bernie Sanders as our revolutionary friend. It's very, so for those of us in the United States, we have a leftist threat on the horizon, and if given their way, they'll do what they did down there. Mexico, for example, has a Hugo Chavez acolyte in power right now. Obrador, AMLO, is using a lot of the same tricks from his book, and he's building clientelism networks, and I predict that he will try to socialize, to bring large swaths of the Mexican economy under his control if he stays in power. So I think that we have a global threat, and I've worked very closely with Movimiento Libertario Venezuela, or the Libertarian Movement of Venezuela, and they're this tremendously courageous group of young people, all of whom could tell you stories about how when they were arrested by the regime, for example, their leader, Yomar Steven Moreno, he will tell you a story about how he was arrested with several of the other activists, and the other activists were beaten in front of him in order to get him to talk. Can talk about Jesus Noria, another friend of mine who actually crossed the border from Merida to Cucuta to see me while I was there, who had been arrested, hit with a gun on the face, broken things in his face, threatened, had to go into hiding. So these are all people, but they still keep fighting. And it's really amazing to me how they can lose so much, fear so much, suffer so much, and still fight. And it's amazing to me.
Yeah, that's the beauty of the human spirit. When these things happen, there is a lot of people who rise up and that sort of thing. The problem is a lot of people wait till it's too late, But it's kind of interesting too, being on that Colombia and Venezuela border. I spent a fair amount of time in Colombia. I was in Venezuela a couple years ago, just to see the difference between the two countries. Colombia went a lot more free market in the last few decades, and it's like almost paradise. If you guys haven't been to Colombia recently, I love it. Medellin is amazing, and then you go to if you want to take the risk, go to Venezuela and see what's going on. It's insane. It's just amazing how these people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and all these pro-socialists won't even go there because, or Cuba as well. Have you been to Cuba as well?
I haven't been to Cuba.
Okay. It's similar, but it's a lot less dire. It's just sort of like just a real peaceful state of total poverty. Like no one has anything. They don't have internet or anything. They're not allowed to have internet. All their television is propaganda, just like the U.S. really. And but Venezuela is just so horrible right now. And yeah, to hear these people, Bernie Sanders and all those sort of people, and they're so pro-socialism, like how do they just ignore it? Like, it's just unbelievable how they just ignore reality.
Well, but it should underscore for us as people who value our own freedom that we need to always have a plan B and a plan C so that the socialists can't do to us what they've done to the people who are in Venezuela. The minute Hugo Chavez got elected, 100,000 Venezuelans left the country. They were visionaries in a way, right? But and then more and more people left, right? And now the doors are shutting. You can't get into Ecuador. You can't get into Peru. You basically can't get into Chile. The only place you can get into is Colombia, and you can't even get a work permit anymore. So we should always be thinking, how do I have multiple passports so if things go bad in my country, I still have a way to travel and work? What do I do with my money so it's not stuck in one country? The Argentines, as an example, just 10 years ago, basically confiscated a third of everybody's bank account. I think we can do better in terms of using cryptocurrency to store some of our money, in terms of maybe storing some of it as physical gold, diversifying our holdings in that way, knowing that we can't count on political stability. And so if we make our own plan B and plan C, we can at the very least protect ourselves. And then also by doing so, we can protect our ability to help others.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a lot of what I talk about at the Dollar Vigilante, which is something else that I do. We've been talking about this for about 10 years, how to get second passports, second residencies, how to become a perpetual traveler, prior taxpayer, live in various ways that the government can't fully pin you down. And I really like that your message is very similar to mine. There's a big mess out there. There's going to be a lot of problems, but you can get around a lot of them. And if you protect yourself, that's really important. And then, like as you said, if you protect yourself, so you get through what's coming, you've still got some assets, you've got crypto or whatever it is, gold, silver, whatever it is, you can help start rebuilding in various areas where there's some hope for liberty again. Because what usually happens is you have liberty to an extent, like in the U.S. A few hundred years ago, for the most part, not completely, but quite a bit. It goes crazy. Everyone becomes very wealthy. And then every single time, this whole socialism idea comes around and they just destroy it all again. But once you get down to zero, just like in the Soviet Union, Russia's now quite a nice place to be for the most part. A lot of these places that have collapsed afterwards, they're really nice again because they don't have any wealth left for the socialists to take, and then they start rebuilding again. So if we can get as many people as possible through all this and survive it all, then we have a much better chance for a better future, at least in some parts of the world. I don't know where those parts of the world will be, but it could even be in the U.S. Once the U.S. government collapses, and it will, it has to, at some point. It's just a matter of when, and it's impossible to predict when. Once that all happens, it can rebuild very quickly.
Absolutely. Well, I think Venezuela has the possibility of having a very bright future. It's right now, I call it a libertarian factory. I talk to Venezuelans every day, new Venezuelans, and talk to them about what's happening, and they all understand, like, this is the fault of Hugo Chavez. This is the fault of bad ideas. It's not hard to take someone who's starving because of socialism and explain to them why they're starving. And, there's a political leader there named Maria Corina Machado, and she's a very hardcore capitalist. She's been that way for the last 20 years. She was in the National Assembly and actually stood up and called Hugo Chavez a thief to his face. And she's running for president, and when they have free elections, I predict that Maria Corina will win, and that you're going to see tremendous market-based reforms, tremendous liberalism and freedom. She's really good friends with Movimiento Libertario Venezuela. You're going to see, I think you're going to see Venezuela rise from the ashes and become a free and prosperous society. You know, it used to be the wealthiest country in South America, and I don't think that that's impossible for it to be in its future, as long as they're able to dispose of the socialists and have free market advocates in power once again.
Yeah, absolutely. I was in Venezuela about 15, 20 years ago. It was right after Chavez got in, and it was great. Caracas was amazing. I went to the best restaurants, the biggest discos, the nicest shopping malls. I was like, this is amazing. And I was talking to one restaurant owner, and I said, you know, how's the economy going? It looks like it's pretty good. He's like, it's okay, but it's going downhill fast. And I was like, why? He's like, Chavez. And I didn't know much about him at the time, right? Like, this is a long time ago. And man, to see it within 15 years just turn into just horrible, like it's beyond horrible. Within 15 years, that's how fast these things can happen.
Yeah, it's really, really shocking, but underscores why we have to take care of ourselves. And I mean, the people who are in Venezuela today are really they're trapped, and so it's very hard to help them right now. Although I mean, we're doing what we can, but I'm optimistic for a better future.
Yeah, me too. And yeah, as you said, it really starts with yourself. So just, you know, make sure you got yourself squared away, that you got, you know, so that you have some options. And of course, if you don't have a lot of money, so you don't have a lot of options, make some money, figure out some ways to make some money. That's why we're anarcho-capitalists here. On that note, you know, is there anything that people can be doing kind of like that are similar to you, or, you know, like some ways to make money from this, like maybe from the medical tourism and that sort of stuff?
All right, so to save money, if you're a healthcare, if you're purchasing healthcare, you can save thousands of dollars a year. And so the first thing you can do is dump your insurance plan. If you have a commercially available insurance plan, that's something that's heavily regulated, where the insurance companies make huge profits and deliver very poor service. If you dump that, there's a new type of plan that's somewhat similar to insurance but not regulated like it, called health sharing. And there are religious health sharing ministries, but now, since the Obamacare mandate has been repealed, there are a few companies that have started up that are doing secular health sharing. And so, like, I'm a member of a health sharing plan, not a health insurance plan, and I only pay $199 a month. I still have to take care of myself for my routine care, for my prescriptions, but if something catastrophic happens, I do have something to fall back on, so it kind of serves the same financial purpose, but I'm saving a couple $100 a month. And some people are saving over $1,000 a month. You can use all kinds of tactics when you have a big ticket medical problem to go abroad. I have a course on this, a video course that if you are interested, you can check it out, drvarner.com/CPR. It stands for Cash Patient Rebellion, where I teach a bunch of strategies on how to save money and take control of your healthcare. In terms of making money, there's a huge business opportunity in medical tourism, and not just to Mexico, all over the world, because people need help going abroad for their healthcare. They need somebody who speaks the language, who can navigate, who can recommend good doctors, who can set up their whole trip, and kind of, it's very intimidating. Like, I feel, I even used a medical tourism facilitator when I went to Mexico for my surgery, but subsequently when I've gone, I just navigate it myself, but I speak fluent Spanish and am a doctor. So it's a lot easier for me than for somebody who doesn't speak Spanish and doesn't have a medical background. But there are companies that fill that service, and I think there's going to be a tremendous growth in that. So medical tourism facilitators are going to be huge in the future. Also, foreign pharmacies that ship into the United States, I think they make huge amounts of money. They're probably technically criminals in the United States, but they, I think there's a big opportunity for crypto to get involved here to try to bypass some problems, especially because the main foreign pharmacies are not shipping things like insulin, like the biologic treatments, some of the really high dollar things, because they have to be refrigerated. You know, on the black market space, you know, bringing insulin across the border into the United States in a little refrigerated container, it would be a form of smuggling, but people interested in doing that could do a lot of good for their customers in the United States. So there are definitely financial opportunities there, and then certainly, you know, one of the big things I have advocated people look into is nursing home care. You know, if you have a family member who needs a nursing home, you're looking at $15,000 a month in the United States. In Mexico, you're looking about $3,000 to $5,000 a month. If you put them in a nursing home, you hire 24-hour care in your house in Mexico, you're probably looking at about $2,000 to $3,000 a month. So you're looking at a fraction of the price. If you want to go further south to Colombia, the price would be even lower. Medellin is beautiful. I'm trying to get my parents to consider going there in the next couple of years, to consider moving there. I think it's a better place to retire than the United States, and you get to play this geographic arbitrage game where if you have your investments in the U.S., you have your U.S. pension from your job or whatever you have, you're earning in dollars, but the Colombian peso is very weak, and the cost of everything down there is very low. So it's a nice way to augment your quality of life, to spend less money and live better.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a huge fan of Colombia for that reason, Medellin especially. Yeah, so when I first got introduced to you, I got an email from a guy named Philip, and the email, or a Facebook message or something, and it was very short. It said, if you don't have Kyle Varner speak at Anarchapulco, I'm not going. And I'm like, what a dick. I'm like, don't come then. I'm like, like, you're going to threaten me? But then he's like, look into him. And I looked you up. I was like, oh, this guy looks really interesting. And then we talked on email. I'm like, okay, this guy's really cool. So I'm definitely going to do it. Not because I was threatened, but because once I found out about you, I was like, awesome. And now that I've had you on, you've been one of the better guests, because you're not only complaining about the problems and know what the problems are, but you're actually doing something about it. That's the most important part. And then you brought up also how to save money, how to make money. That's perfect for a narco-capitalist show. So for all the young guys out there, I definitely agree. I see a lot of opportunities there in the black market, especially these dark webs type stuff with cryptocurrencies. A lot of people need a lot of these sort of medications, and they just can't get them for anywhere near the price that they can afford in the U.S. So you'll be actually helping a lot of people. Of course, it is illegal, but who cares? And especially with the dark web stuff, it's really pretty easy to, they did get Ross Ulbricht, but you could be. What I would do is I would go outside of the U.S. to do it, and I would do it from VPNs and all that kind of stuff. But be careful. I don't want anyone to get kidnapped by the state for trying to help people, which is what you'd be doing. But a real pleasure to have you on, Kyle. We're definitely going to start talking now about having you at Anarchapulco in one way or another. I'm really excited about that. And is there anything we didn't talk about you want to talk about? And if not, let us know, or let people know how they can find out more about you.
All right, well, you can find more out about me at drvarner.com, drvarner.com. That's my website. I will have a book coming up somewhere in the next 6 months called White Coat Cartels, where I will expose the dirty underbelly of the medical industry that has this close connection to government and that's creating cartels with the government to rip you off. And if you want to learn about how to save money and take control of your healthcare, drvarner.com/CPR, you can find a link to my complete course that will teach you all of the strategies that I've used over the course of my life and that I've recommended to my patients to save lots of money and to be the person in control. So I really look forward to coming to Anarchapulco. I think everything I've heard about it says that it's like the most amazing libertarian conference ever, and it's a lot of fun, and I know you have some amazing people there. I've seen the speaker list in the past, so I will really look forward to seeing you there. It sounds like it's going to be a heck of a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. I look forward to seeing you too. And for people who don't know, it's February 13th to 16th, 2020. Beforehand, for a couple of days, we have the Health and Wellness pre-conference event, and then we're going to have a Health and Wellness afterwards as well. A lot of that includes everything, like just stem cells, everything. We have dentist people in Acapulco. Wow. So, a lot of the stuff that Kyle's talking about, you can, if you're like, I need something done, you could probably get it done when you come down to Anarchapulco. So check into that. I'll have the links to that all down below. Please share this, like, subscribe, share down below. Share it with anyone who's having some problems with the medical system in the U.S. and maybe they need a certain thing and they can't get it, that sort of thing. Definitely share this with them and try to help them out. So we'll leave it at that. And once again, thank you very much. It was a great episode of Anarchast, and we'll leave it there. So that's it for Anarchast here. Hope for what's that?
I said thanks for having me on. Sorry, I jumped the gun there.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. It was a pleasure. So that's it for Anarchast. Your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
Anarchapulco is so hype, I'm trying to tell ya. This the event of the year and best vacation ever. Ron Potter, Jeffrey Tucker, just to name a few. Get your tickets, you don't want to miss it. You should roll through. Talking politics to health and self-improvement to investing. So many things, not one thing. Learn how to live life unchained, yeah. 4 days vibing on the beach, time to connect. All about growth, way more than a conference. This is Anarchapulco, yeah. Let's go.
You ain't seen nothing yet.